Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It's the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Nothing like this program. You can go up and down the dial. You won't hear it. Only right here, a program on a Catholic network dedicated to non-Catholics who have questions about the Catholic faith. That is why we are here. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. Or, if you wish, text the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. If you wish, you can also send us an email. ctc@ewtn.com is the address. ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. Rich Jesse handles social media for us. If you would like to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we are streaming live on both of those platforms even as we speak. All you have to do is put your question in the comments box. Rich will see that. He'll shoot it to us here in Studio One, and we'll take it from there, as they say. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how you getting along today?
Very well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
Interesting question here from Andres in the Diocese of San Diego. Dr. Anders, I think I misheard you when you said that heaven is not a place because there are no tangible physical human bodies there. If I did hear you incorrectly, then I agree with your statement because Ezekiel and Elijah, as well as our Blessed Mother Mary, were all taken up to heaven, body and soul. Therefore, heaven is a place. Please confirm. Thanks. And that's from Andres in San Diego.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, of course, the Catholic doctrine on eschatology, future things, both our own personal future and cosmic future, is that there will be a resurrection from the dead, which will be the resurrection of bodies and a renewal of the created world. And so we will enjoy an embodied and spatio-temporal eternity.
Okay.
That's what we have to look forward to at the return of Christ. But when most people have in mind, going to heaven when you die, what they're really thinking about is not the resurrection from the dead at the end of time. They're thinking about what's going to happen immediately upon death, which is the intermediate state. And the Catholic faith is pretty clear that the intermediate state is disembodied. It's souls without bodies that enjoy, if they're saints, they enjoy the vision of God, the beatific vision, but without the benefit of a bodily medium. So the statement I made was about the condition of the separated souls. Put aside for a second the question of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary or the Ascended Christ. I'm just talking about the experience of the soul of the faithful, particularly the saints, and their knowledge of God, their experience of God in the beatific vision. And it is a disembodied experience. And so if you ask, Tom Price is a pretty holy, saintly guy, I'm going to, assume for the sake of argument that he goes zip off to heaven right when he dies. I certainly hope he does. Tom's experience when Tom dies, if you said to me, where is Tom? Well, I'd say that, I can answer the question, but technically speaking, that's a badly put question.
Yeah.
Because you can't really talk about where when you're talking about a disembodied existence. And how I can talk about, what I can talk about, where is a little bit squirrely, because that locates me someplace in the space-time continuum, and Tom's existence will be different from that. Now, what about the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary? What about the Ascension of Jesus? What about Elijah? What about Enoch and these characters? Well, they're a special case. They're a special case. Now, should we conceive of the Blessed Virgin as located, say, if you blast off, head to, Alpha Centauri, and then, take a left at the first constellation and go 45 degrees for 52 light years, you'll get there. No, I don't think anybody thinks of it that way. And no, in antiquity, there were people who thought of it that way. There was a Greek Hellenistic idea that there was something called the Empyrean heaven, which was literally astronomically up there, beyond the fixed stars. And medieval Christians assimilated biblical beliefs to the concept of the Empyrean heaven, and imagined that the saints who had bodies literally dwelled in a spatially located way someplace up there. But I think modern cosmology makes such beliefs impossible to hold, and so we have to say it's kind of a mystery. I don't really know where to put the Blessed Virgin's assumed body or Jesus' ascended body. It's enough for me to know that God has them, that he knows how that works out. I don't know how that works out, but that at the end of time, when Christ comes back, it will be an embodied way, and we will have an embodied existence.
Andres, thanks you so much for your question. Here's one now from, looks like, wow, it just says L. So, okay, this is from L. Thanks for your recommendations on books over the years. Are you familiar with these two books? And if so, are they acceptable or truthful for Catholics to read? Number one, Noah's Flood by Ryan and Pittman. And then the second one, The Lost History of Christianity by P. Jenkins. Familiar with either one of those?
Jenkins, yes. The Pittman book on Noah's Flood, no idea. Can't comment on that one at all. I do know Jenkins' book, highly recommend it. Recommend it. So there are a number of books that go by titles like The Lost Christianity and The Lost History of Christianity, and most of those are just poppycock and nonsense, to be honest with you. But Jenkins' book is quite good, and what Jenkins is looking at is not some sort of secret underground church that that the Catholic Church suppressed, a la Dan Brown.
Oh boy,
it's nothing like that. What his book is about is what used to be the geographical and demographic heart of the Christian world was the Christian Middle East. We're talking about, of course, obviously Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa, of course, Persia, Chaldea, Babylonia, Assyria. That part of the world was the geographic and demographic heartland of the Christian world. And at one time, the Diocese of Baghdad was the most populous Christian diocese in the whole world.
Wow.
Okay? Now, what happened, of course, was in the 7th century with the rise of Islam, Islamic expansionism, Islamic imperialism, is that those Christian populations were just absolutely decimated. And there are historic Christian communities in those places that continue to exist, but as a persecuted minority, whereas they used to be the defining culture.
Okay. Well, there you go. And thanks so much for your email. In a moment, we'll be talking with Michael in Tennessee, also Jeremiah in Southern California. Lines are available for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 for Call to Communion.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I don't like looking back. I prefer to look forward and keep moving forward. There's plenty to cover. I do a lot of research and try to dig out the bits and pieces of a life or of an agenda that people don't want to talk about.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Sadly, we mostly see the abortion issue divided upon party lines, but Louisiana's demonstrating that protecting the unborn and their mothers can be and should be a bipartisan effort. Republican Jack McFarland and Democrat Katrina Jackson Andrews are co-sponsors of legislation increasing the funding of the Alternatives to Abortion program, and it's getting bipartisan support. The increase from $1 million to over $4 million will go to pregnancy centers, adoption agencies, maternity homes, and social service organizations that don't promote or refer for abortion. Some of the services include parenting classes, baby supplies, counseling, job training, and classes on budgeting, all for up to 3 years after the birth of the baby. That's pro-woman and pro-child.
Follow us on social media at Life Issues Institute and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
It's Called to Communion on this Thursday afternoon here on EWTN Radio. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. We do have 3 lines open, 833-288-3986. 3986. Hey, brand new from EWTN Publishing, A Light to All Nations on the Nature and Mission of the Church by Father Brian Mullady. This book that will help you elevate your understanding of the Church by helping you unpack what one of the central documents of Vatican II, that would be Lumen Gentium, what did it really teach? And you'll understand it through the lens of traditional church teachings, history, and philosophy. In this great book, Father Mullady explains the supernatural character of the Church and our universal call to holiness. You'll discover the authentic character and purpose of the people of God and the unique vocations to which we are all called. This book is a winner. If you know Father Brian Mullady, you know that he is a deep thinker and puts an awful lot into all of his books. The latest one, A Light to All Nations on the Nature and Mission of the Church. It's available right now at EWTNRC.com. Buy Catholic, shop Catholic, EWTNRC.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN, beginning today with Jeremiah, a first-time caller from Southern California. Hello, Jeremiah. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hello. I'm calling because currently I'm run into a little bit of issue. I'm a Protestant. I've grown up believing the Evangelical Church, and for the many, many years, I've been involved with ministry, and currently I'm a youth pastor. And over the past couple of years in my walk and developing of my faith and searching for something a little deeper, I've come in not conflict, but understanding of the role of the Catholic Church and the value that it brings. See, I grew up with this mentality that Catholics were not Christian. I grew up with this mentality that Catholics, they taught this wonky doctrine that was not scriptural, and I kind of stayed far away from it. And then I was confronted with the kind of shallowness I felt in my faith, and I was seeking for something deeper about a couple years ago. And I started this journey to understand what it looks like to look to Mary. What does it look like to see the sacraments as they are and the beauty of it and the depth of the biblical account of Mass? I'm like, wow, I missed out on this. What is this whole world? In the meantime, I'm currently, serving at a Protestant church, and I'm currently serving full-time youth pastor and family pastor. And I have a family of 5, and been doing great. And as I've been growing in my faith, I kind of kept it not a secret, but just I wasn't sharing it with the others around me out of fear of what they would think, right? But then recently, about a week ago or a couple weeks ago, I was confronted by my pastor, and he saw that I baptized my children because I think there's fullness there, and I value it. He caught that and started asking questions. And then he told me, well, do you pray to Mary? Once I asked Mary for prayer, yes. Do you use the rosary? I said there's value in it, and I see the depth in it. And those are huge red flags for him and his concern for me and the leadership. And so I'm about to, in a week, I'm about to head into a meeting with the church leadership, and they're going to walk me through, about 15 things they disagree with about the Catholic Church, and they're asking me to state that it's heresy. That's what they want. And so my question and I'm looking for guidance, wisdom, encouragement, because I believe in my walk, in the fullness of the tools that God has ordained on this earth through the Catholic Church. I believe in it, and technically I would desire to be Catholic, but I'm not confirmed in the Church. But the thing is that I can't say they're heresy, but also this is the livelihood of my family. And it's that I feel like I'm confronted right now. It's like, I don't know what's next. If I deny that, if I call this heresy, it's going against my beliefs, but if I keep true, kind of keep it to myself and lie almost, then that next I'm able to provide a little bit longer for my family.
I get it. And Jeremiah, you are not the first person in this situation.
We had a call just yesterday from someone in a very similar case where he was being called, basically on the carpet by his superiors there at that church.
I think this was a call about Jeremiah, in fact. I think
very
someone
good.
Called on his behalf.
Oh, okay, very good.
But we hear this story all the time, and I've been there. I used to be employed at an evangelical church when my conscience began to be pricked by the Word of God that I found in the Catholic faith, and it created a major problem for me. And you might have heard of the name of Marcus Grodi, who started the Coming Home Network and the popular show on EWTN, The Journey Home. And if you watch any of those episodes, you'll find out that the number of Protestant ministers who have been in your position are just mammoth. And so I absolutely know what you're going through. Well, I think you're right that what's going to happen is that the leadership of this church is going to confront you, and they're going to demand that you abjure the Catholic faith as a condition of continued employment, probably. And it sounds to me, based on your description, that for you, if you follow your conscience, you can't. If you follow your conscience, you're not going to be able to affirm what they want you to affirm, and you're not going to be able to deny what they want you to deny. And if the question is, should I disobey conscience for the sake of my income? Well, Martin Luther, who most Protestants think a good bit of, was confronted with that at the Diet of Worms, and he was asked to abjure his idiosyncratic beliefs, and he responded, "My conscience is held captive to the Word of God. Here I stand, I can do no other." And, of course, Protestants have typically hailed Luther as a champion of conscience for standing up for his beliefs in the face of that threat. And as a Catholic, I totally disagree with Luther's conclusions. I think he got the Christian faith dead wrong. But any Catholic has to admire the devotion to conscience, because for Catholics, that is the bedrock of the moral life. Obedience to conscience is the very first thing that makes a moral life. If you disobey conscience, everything else falls apart. You can have no moral life in the absence of obedience to conscience. So, I can't tell you, disobey your conscience. I have to say, obey your conscience. You have to obey your conscience. Now, I have no idea what the specific charges are. I bet I can guess. I can probably guess 5 or 6 of them off the top of my head. They're going to nail you on sola scriptura and sola fide and sola Christe and probably on devotion to Mary and the saints and the existence of purgatory and the Pope and sacred tradition and all the normal shibboleths that divide Protestants from. Then I would question whether it's a good idea to go.
To go to that meeting?
To go to the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. And perhaps what you need to do, and look, and again, this is just a thought. You take it or leave it. Maybe what you need to do is start thinking about crafting a letter of resignation. And I don't know if the church is big enough to have an HR director, but go in and have a conversation with the HR director and maybe with whoever your superior is, your supervisor, about possibility of severance pay or something like that, and start looking for other options. Because if you already know the outcome, you know what you're going to say, and you know what they're going to say, then you're asking, do I want to go be dragged through the mud? And there is a time when we have to stand up for our faith in the face of persecution and suffer opprobrium and ridicule and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know that that's this time. Right, because you're not here necessarily. This is not about you witnessing the truth of the Catholic faith to them. This is about them giving you the third degree as a condition of employment, and it must probably going to be traumatic. And you'll probably walk away wishing you'd said this differently or that differently, and the outcome's going to be the same anyway. So you might just think maybe I can define the terms of my departure, rather than letting them determine my departure. And, of course, they will cast it in their light. They'll tell the story of the meeting to their people their way. If you get to tell the story yourself, then you might save yourself and your family a good bit of dignity. Now, I don't know where your wife is in all of this. I don't know what she knows, what she doesn't know. But since this meeting is next week, one way or the other, I recommend that you have this conversation with her ASAP. And look, this is a long way down the pike, obviously, but there's a tremendous need for good youth ministry in the Catholic Church, and both at the diocesan level, the parish level, and the parachurch level, if you will. There are national apostolates that do this kind of work on a broad scale across the country, and so there's a place for you to land. And I think I mentioned on the show yesterday that this is something that I I can't get you a job, but we have contacts with people in different ministries, and if you reach out, we might be able to put you in touch with some names of folks you can talk to that can, push the thing down the road, and you just start getting connections in the Catholic Youth Ministry Department. If becoming Catholic is a thing that you want to do down the road, and in working in ministry, continue in ministry is something you want to do.
Jeremiah, I can give you one guarantee, and that is that David and I and the rest of our show team will certainly keep you in our prayers. Thank you so much for your call. God bless you, sir. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Michael in Tennessee, listening on the EWTN app. Hey there, Michael. What's on your mind today, sir?
Yeah, hi. Thanks. I really appreciate your guys' show. I just learned so much from your sharing your wisdom. I had a question. A friend of mine believes reincarnation is supported by the Bible. They cite evidence of John the Baptist as formerly Elijah. Also, there was the incident where the man was born blind, and they asked, who was with sin? Was it the parents or the son? They said that couldn't be possible unless someone had previous sin. And they say that, the church fathers never talked about it because they wanted people to focus more on the here and now, but that they did believe in reincarnation. So I don't really know what to say to that. So I was just curious what you guys have to say to that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So this is a good illustration of the principle that people with an axe to grind can find a way to make the Bible say anything. Right? I had a conversation recently with somebody about who was maintaining vehemently that Jesus was a vegan. Now, I happen to be a vegan, but I'm not so foolish as to think that Jesus was one. I mean, the first thing he did when he rose from the dead was eat a fish.
That's right.
And he celebrated the Passover with his disciples, which involved meat. So I mean, they offered sacrifice in the temple. So I mean, it was just a ridiculous thing. But the idea is that people love to they love to enlist biblical characters in the service of their favorite ideology, no matter how ridiculous. And this is one of those instances. So the texts in question that you have cited say absolutely nothing about the preexistence of the soul. No, absolutely nothing. And they offer no theory about ensoulment or anything of the sort. And the truth of the matter is that in Hebrew religion, there wasn't a clear position on the soul as being something separate from the body. That really is something that is Hellenistic, associated with Pythagoreanism and Platonism. The Hebrews thought of the soul as the substantial self, really, which was an embodied material reality. And there's just no hint in there that they have some idea of preexistence. The passage about John the Baptist you can read it in context and understand what it's talking about. The people had a problem with the idea that John the Baptist was Elijah because they said, doesn't Elijah have to come first? And Jesus says, well, if you're willing to accept this, meaning you have to put on a certain kind of interpretive lens to get this, John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elijah. Now, that doesn't mean that he had the spirit as in the individual soul of Elijah. You go back and read the story of Elijah and Elisha says, I want a double portion of your spirit, meaning I want to have the prophetic charism that you have, to double measure. So that's all it means. It's someone who's operating within the ministry parameters of John the Baptist with the same sort of charism, the same vocation that God sent, not literally the same person. Also, the idea that the church fathers didn't discuss this, well, you could only know that, or you'd only say that, you could only make a claim like that if you had actually never read the church fathers, right? Because, in fact, they do talk about it. Now, there was a church father who believed in the preexistence of souls, but not reincarnation. And his position was anathematized by the rest of the Christian world. It was rejected as heretical. And that Christian writer was Origen of Alexandria, who wrote in the 3rd century. And Origen believed, like any good Platonist, in the celestial primordial existence of souls in a kind of ethereal, heavenly, disembodied realm that he thought fell into a fleshly condition through a primordial sin, and their embodiment was part of the consequence and punishment for that primordial sin, and that Christ redeemed them from that to the state of bodilessness again, that they could return to that primordial vision of God. So he did have a concept of preexistence, but it wasn't the Hindu idea of passing from body to body to body. It was pre-existence, incarnation, and then back to disembodied. And the rest of the church roundly rejected him. And it's been something that Catholic theologians have reflected on for a very long time. In fact, if you want to look at St. Thomas's Summa Contra Gentiles, Part 2, I think it's question 83, it specifically addresses, did the soul exist before the body? Thomas answers, no, and then a rather lengthy explanation of why that can't possibly have been the case.
There you go, Michael. Thanks so much for your call. In a moment, Larry in Louisiana, Andre in Trinidad, Peter in Seattle, Maureen in Florida. Lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hi, I'm Montse Alvarado. Next time on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, a doctor explains the science on how abortion pill reversal treatment works, as several pregnancy centers in New York face a lawsuit for promoting it. Plus, the ministry that provides healing and accompaniment for couples struggling with infertility.
Sunday at 10 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. Eastern, only on EWTN Radio.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
EWTN is the only radio station I play when I'm in my car. I try to listen to your show as much as I can. I listen at work.
I was riding around yesterday crying. I didn't know about your show, and I turned on EWTN on my radio. There it was about grieving. Maybe it was God-inspired.
My mom, she was the one that got me into EWTN 24/7.
May is the month dedicated to the Blessed Mother. Pope St. John Paul II said, "Today we begin the month dedicated to Our Lady, a favorite of popular devotion." In accord with the long-standing tradition of devotion, parishes and families continue to make the month of May a Marian month, celebrating it with many devout liturgical, catechetical, and pastoral initiatives. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Join us in this devotion to the Blessed Mother with rosaries, books for children and adults, nativity sets, prayer cards, statues, and more. Available now at EWTNRC.com.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, we've got questions from our own Society 315 for Joe Heschmeyer. Join us, Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
It's Called to Communion on this Thursday afternoon here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Our friends in the upper Midwest need to hear from you next week. The great Real Presence Radio will air their spring live drive, and that'll be starting on Tuesday. So if you're listening in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Wisconsin, or anywhere, remember to support your EWTN Catholic radio station. They started out with one computer in a closet in Grand Forks at a Newman Center. And now it's like 25 radio stations.
Isn't that amazing?
In 5 states.
That's fantastic.
I just think it's awesome. Let's go to our friend Andre in Trinidad, listening on YouTube. Andre, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, dear. Hi, Dr. Anders and Tom. Well, a very well-known evangelist whom I follow writes on page 106 of a Eucharistic text, which has gone globally recently, that, quote, Catholics observe the Sabbath on Sunday. I still see this understanding of the Sabbath on the internet frequently, including from some internationally popular priests, in spite of what I learned from you, Dr. Anders. I also follow several apologists who teach that to say this is to speak loosely and inaccurately. I often feel caught between a rock and a hard place on this topic. Can you elaborate? And thanks for taking the call.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So I think you would be greatly helped by reading the letter of John Paul II on the Feast of Sunday called Dies Domini, the Day of the Lord, where he gives a rather extensive and definitive understanding of the Catholic doctrine on the Sabbath and Sunday. And you're correct. I think that you quoted some fellows that said that to speak about Sunday as the Sabbath is to speak loosely and not precisely, not exactly, and that's true. And And look, Catholics have a long history of using language in an expansive and analogous and figurative way. And so that's, like similarly to call Jesus the Passover lamb was, well, that's true in a kind of an extended and poetic sense. I mean, Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover sacrifice, and there's definite continuity between Passover and Jesus, but he is not literally the Passover lamb. I mean, he doesn't have, woolly fur. He doesn't bleat. He doesn't walk on all fours, nor was he sacrificed in ancient Egypt at the time of the Exodus, right? So it's an imprecise way of speaking, but you know what the author means. You know what the sacred writer means when Jesus is, St. John calls him the Lamb of God, right? And in the same way, if someone says that we celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday, there's a similar kind of continuity, discontinuity. I mean, obviously, the Sabbath was the command in the Old Covenant to refrain from work on the seventh day. We don't do that. I usually cut my grass every Saturday. I mean, that is a day for work in the Christian calendar. We don't refrain from work on Saturday. Moreover, we didn't just push the Sabbath commandment in the calendar forward one day or back one day, depending on your point of view, to Sunday. If that were the case, then Christians would cease from work on Sunday, and that would be the totality of obedience to the commandment. That's not what characterizes Sunday for the Christian church. The preeminent form of celebration on Sunday is not idleness, not refraining from work, but the celebration of Holy Mass, the commemoration of Christ's death and resurrection, which occurred, of course, on the first day of the week, which was Sunday. And, the book of Hebrews talks about there's the still being a Sabbath rest for the people of God that transcends the Jewish Sabbath. And for the Christian church, Sunday is the first day of the new creation, the inauguration of this Sabbath rest, the kingdom of God that was intimated in the Old Covenant, but only inaugurated in the New. And so there's this constant tension of continuity and discontinuity, and we use the language of Old Testament ritual and sacrifice continually to describe the Christian era, but in ways that are analogous. Think about Paul saying that he was being poured out as a drink offering, for example. Well, no, he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't literally being sliced open and dumped out on the altar of the Temple of Jerusalem. And yet he uses that metaphor and that sacrificial language to describe the nature of his apostolic ministry. And that's all of the New Testament is awash in these kinds of parallelisms to Old Testament ritual.
There you go. Andre, thanks so much for checking in from Trinidad. Always enjoy our conversations. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Peter in Seattle now, listening on the EWTN app. Hey there, Peter. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hello, Tom and Dr. Anders. I have a question about the founders of various Protestant sects. And we know that Luther founded the Lutheran Church, Henry VIII founded the Anglican Church. Is there a person that we could pinpoint as being the founder of a typical American evangelical church?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So evangelicalism is a historical development that historians typically date to the 1730s and the 1740s in England and the United States. And there was a movement in conservative Puritan churches, pietistic churches of the time that came to be known as the First Great Awakening, that was characterized by a heavy emphasis upon personal conversion, a sort of heartfelt gripping of the soul with the consciousness of sin and the need for repentance and conversion, could be accompanied by some dramatic demonstrative behaviors, people fainting and swooning and crying out for mercy to God, that sort of thing. And it was a movement that crossed denominational barriers in the Anglo-American Protestant church. It wasn't limited to Presbyterians or Congregationalists or Baptists. It sort of swept around everybody. And there were theoreticians, there were theologians that reflected upon this, the most famous of which was Jonathan Edwards. He has a number of sermons and treatises upon the revival in Northampton when he was there, and he reflects on it. The one that famous with Divine and Supernatural Light was one of the texts that he wrote. He wrote more extensive like highly theoretical studies of the interior life of one converted. His book, The Religious Affections, is a very important work of American intellectual history, born out of the experience of revival. And I highly recommend everybody ought to read Religious Affections. You don't have to agree with it, but it's just seminal reading for American intellectual Puritan Protestant history and had a profound impact on culture. There were practitioners who sought to elicit this kind of revival experience in their audiences, and none was more famous than Charles Wesley, different theologically from Edwards, which goes to show, it underscores the fact this was a trans-denominational movement. Edwards and Wesley didn't see eye to eye on soteriology, but they did see eye to eye on the need for conversion and this sort of going out beyond the bounds of parish boundaries, into preaching in open fields and that sort of thing. So Charles Wesley was a major practitioner as well as a theoretician. Gilbert Tennent is a name that's not a household name today, but was a very important character in this movement. So Tennent, Edwards, Wesley, and then probably nobody more important than George Whitefield, who was the Billy Graham, or if you will, the Joel Osteen or whatever of his day. He was the popular preacher who had the highest audience, the greatest acclaim. Ben Franklin went out and took measurements because he was not terribly interested in the message, but fascinated by the phenomena of how Whitefield could project his voice across an open field, and estimated, the numbers of thousands of people that Whitefield could reach in one particular sermon. So all of these people had in common the idea that what counts, what matters in religious life, is conversion of heart, a sort of heartfelt, gripping awareness of one's sin, the need for repentance and faith in Christ, and justification, regeneration, and that things like denominational boundaries and sacramental theology were of secondary importance. And that really is the key thing. That is what defines evangelicalism as a movement. It's the emphasis on conversionism and the new birth over against denominational identity. And so that it begins in the 1730s with the First Great Awakening. Revivalism, the attempt to sort of provoke these dramatic outbursts of conversion, changes theologically in the 19th century. The phenomena remain the same. The underlying theology shifts in the Second Great Awakening, and a completely new crop of preachers like Charles Grandison Finney and Asa Mahan crop up, and later in the century, D.L. Moody and Billy Sunday in the beginnings of the 20th century. And what characterized them was less of an emphasis upon the sovereign movement of the Holy Spirit in bringing about these conversions, and more emphasis upon the will, the initiative of human beings. And so institutions like the altar call, which are so common in evangelical churches today, telling people to come up to the front of the church and give your heart to Jesus, that sort of thing. The idea of the sinner's prayer, that I'm going to hand you a formula and you say this prayer and invite Jesus into your heart and you'll know you're saved. These are innovations of the Second Great Awakening. The sinner's prayer was invented, the idea of such a prayer was invented by D.L. Moody. The altar call, the anxious bench, these were innovations of Charles Grandison Finney. And then in the 20th century, someone who drew inspiration from the likes of Billy Sunday and D.L. Moody was the very famous Billy Graham. And so the model of the revival as an institution and an occasion for preaching conversionistic, evangelistic sermons, Graham perfected that, of course, through the use as well of media and modern technology, to an extent that no one in the world had ever done before. And so I don't think anybody's probably beaten this in terms of action. Whitefield probably held the record previously, but Graham has preached to more human beings than anybody else in the history of the Christian church. And it was very much this revivalistic evangelical message. Another person who was instrumental was Bill Bright, the founder of a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ, who took the spirituality and turned it into a program for personal development and discipleship on college campuses. And his ministry had a tremendous impact across the world. He published a little book called The Four Spiritual Laws that tried to reduce the sinner's prayer to 4 heads. And when I was growing up in the evangelical world, we had thousands of these in my house. My parents used to give them out to strangers on the street, And I believe The Four Spiritual Laws has been printed more than 1 billion times.
Wow.
It's probably was unknown outside of evangelicalism, but probably one of the best distributed pieces of literature in world history, honestly, and it comes out of the same enterprise. And then after the fundamentalist modernist controversy of the 20s and the late 19th century and the crisis over Darwinism and biblical higher criticism, conservative Protestants tended to sort of withdraw into their cultural shell. That began to trouble Protestant intellectuals in the 1940s. And there were a group of people, probably most importantly, Carl F.H. Henry, as well as E.J. Carnell, Harold Ockenga. There were some other names that founded the National Association of Evangelicals in 1948, and together with Billy Graham, the periodical Christianity Today. And from 1948 on, evangelicalism really became a much more mainstream movement with more intellectual respectability, at least in its own eyes, and to some extent in the eyes of other people. And it's been growing and developing and changing ever since. Probably some of the best living historians of the movement would be Mark Knoll, who, interestingly, he may have just retired recently, but finished his career as a tenured faculty at Notre Dame, a Catholic institution, interestingly. Okay. Yeah. George Marsden would be another historian you would want to read. Ernst Sandin. There are other names, but you might start with Knoll. So there's a brief history of the evangelical movement for you from the 1730s to the modern era.
Quite the list for you there, Peter. Thanks so much for your call. Call to Communion here on EWTN. We have a special broadcast for you coming up on Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio Essentials and EWTN Television. We will bring you live the worldwide Children's Holy Hour. This has been going on for many, many years. We bring it to you this year from the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament right here in Alabama, at Hanceville, Alabama. So check that out Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Television and on EWTN Radio Essentials, the worldwide Children's Holy Hour. Let's go now to Maureen in Kissimmee, Florida, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hello, Maureen. What's on your mind today?
Hi, yes. I am a cradle Catholic. My siblings were cradle Catholics, all the sacraments, the whole routine. My brother, youngest brother, is on wife number 3. Despite that, he's always continued to come to Mass. He used to say it was very good for his soul. Last week, he sent out an email to my sister and me saying that he's going to be baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist. It actually occurred this last weekend. I was so stunned by the sudden news, although the third wife is Seventh-day Adventist. And I'm just wondering, do I continue to just say nothing? Do I have a moral responsibility to say anything to him other than I'll pray for you, or just in the name of family harmony, just continue to say nothing?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. I need to ask a few questions before I can answer. The first and most important one is, do you have a well-founded expectation, not just a vague hope, but a sort of reasonable, warranted expectation that if you say something that he will change his mind, that he'll come to his senses, that he will repent or return to the Catholic faith? Or do you think that saying something is likely just going to alienate him and make him double down and become defensive?
I think, unfortunately, that's the case. I remember several years ago, at one point, he had said that he had gone to talk to a priest. This was when he was on marriage number 2, and the priest told him he was going to hell. And I don't think he's ever really recovered from that. So I know I'm not going to, I doubt I'm going to get him to change his ways. I have a feeling the Adventist folks are probably very welcoming and, oh, please come in, and the whole bit. So
sure.
Yeah.
So that kind of answers your question, right? Because what would be the purpose of saying something if you think that the result will be worse than the present circumstance? Like, the only goal of saying something would be if you could actually move him to change his mode of life and to assume a more rational and better religious practice. If it's going to just deepen his alienation from the church, then there's literally no warrant for saying something, except that you have some kind of, I would say, almost sort of superstitious conviction that this is somehow on you and you've got to do something to clear your own soul. But that's just not the case, right? The goal is charity, and that's to help him live the most authentic Catholic life you can, and it might be that saying nothing is the best route you have for accomplishing that.
Yeah.
That's why moral theologians say that you do have an obligation to admonish the sinner, but one of the qualifications is if you have a warranted expectation that they'll listen to you. If they don't, then you literally have no reason to say something. The other qualification would be if he would take an admonition, are you the best person in his life to make that admonition? I can't answer that question, but many times when I receive this kind of phone call, when someone calls and says, should I say something to my relative? The very fact that they're calling me suggests that they're not the best person to make this admonition because they're so doubtful about it.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, they don't have a well-founded expectation that the person is going to listen. And so the other qualification is it has to be grave matter. Well, this counts as grave matter, but you've only got 1 out of 3.
Yeah.
And so my recommendation is that you not say anything, and that if he's alienated from the church because he feels the church to be harsh and judgmental, then you exhibit the opposite virtue with your behavior, not with your words.
Yeah.
And so you live the contradiction to his stereotyping of the Catholic Church.
Appreciate your call, Maureen. We hope that's helpful for you. Here is Jim in Valley, Nebraska, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Hey there, Jim. What's on your mind today, sir?
Yes. Thank you guys for doing what you do. I really appreciate it. I'll try to get to this very quick. My question's on absolution. Are all sins absolved if the priest gives absolution, even if the confessor isn't truly sorry, and would do it all over again if the same opportunity presented itself? And if I can go into a real brief example, a lady was married and widowed. After a few years, she remarried a divorced Lutheran man, and they've been married for over 40 years. His ex-wife had recently died, and then they were remarried. They were married into the Catholic Church. She did not receive communion during that entire time that they were married. But now that his ex-wife died, they got married, and I assume she went to confession, and now she's receiving communion. I'm pretty sure that if the opportunity arose, she would do it all over again. So what is the power of the priest when he does do the absolution, but the confessor isn't really truly sorry for what they've done for the past few years?
I got you. So if a person goes to confession and says, I'm sorry, that's pretty good prima facie evidence that they're sorry. Now, what does sorrow mean? What does contrition mean in the context of the Catholic confessional? It does not mean some sort of heart-rending emotional experience. It doesn't mean heaping guilt upon yourself. It simply means an intellectual recognition that I did what is objectively wrong and that I purpose in the future not to do it again, though I might fail in that resolution. It's an intention in the will not to do the thing again. It has nothing to do with whether I can imaginatively travel to a moment in the past, sort of relive or reenact the experience in the past, and come to a different decision. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that whatsoever at all. It is a forward-looking disposition. So it's entirely, I'm not advising this, but it is an entirely intelligible, it's an understandable, it's a comprehensible situation where a person could say, recognize that my past mistakes came with a measure of, say, sensible pleasure, comfort, consolation, convenience that I materially benefited from, that it's hard for me to look back on without a kind of wistful reminiscence, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think anybody who lived a wayward life and has turned their life around is tempted to this. I mean, I know that I am. If I look back over my past mistakes, intellectually, I wish that I hadn't done them. But my whole sensibility is mired in a kind of biological memory that's pleasant. I mean, sin feels good. And it's impossible for me to think back to immoderate moments of my life and not have a certain kind of sort of very low-grade, base animalistic appreciation for the pleasures that drew me away from God. It doesn't mean that I want to do them again. I don't want to do them. But I don't have to sit there and beat my breast and hate myself and oh, woe is me, in order to be forgiven or to have genuine contrition. I just have to come to the recognition that, that was the wrong path. I'm going to take a different path. I'm going to change my life. And the criteria that the priest used to determine that is, do they say they're sorry? Now, let's say the priest asks the question, do you intend to perform this sin again? And the penitent says, absolutely. Then the priest withholds absolution. He doesn't absolve. Okay?
Okay.
But as long as the intention is to not do it again in the future, then that is sufficient contrition for absolution. And all these other qualifications, you don't go into all that.
Jim, thanks so much for your call. Here's Rebecca, a first-time caller in Clinton Township, Michigan, listening on the great Ave Maria radio. Rebecca, we've got about a minute and a half. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thank you for having me. I have recently read a few stories from the life of the saints that involved some extreme and disturbing to me, like bodily mortification. And at the time, they were viewed as signs of sanctity, and they are still viewed like that today. But I was wondering how that is different from self-harm, and also if the church has ever taken like an official position on these acts, and if it's something that I have to kind of accept as signs of sanctity when they are disturbing to me.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, first of all, the church has taken a position, particularly regarding extreme manifestations. There was a group in the 14th and 15th centuries called the Flagellantes that really made this sort of display central to their spirituality and to a fanatical degree, and the church spoke against them quite harshly. And the common position, I think, of spiritual directors and theologians today would be that corporal penances should be undertaken only in rare circumstances and under a spiritual direction, and they absolutely can be neurotic and harmful to the soul.
Yeah.
As to do you have to take the point of view of medieval hagiography when reading these? The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so, yes, it was common as a kind of literary genre. I mean, Carolyn Walker Bynum in her work on feminine fasting in the late Middle Ages, you can see this sort of stuff writ large. And you don't have to take that point of view. It's perfectly intelligible to critique that kind of stuff after the fact.
Rebecca, thanks for your call. A quick question from Micah. He says, I asked my buddy what's stopping him from becoming a Catholic. He said, according to the Roman Catholic Church, I am a heretic at heart, and I don't want any possibilities of the Inquisition breathing down my neck. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I've been Catholic, for 20 years now, and I have absolutely no Catholic friends called in front of the Inquisition.
Glad to hear that.
Right. In fact, there isn't an Inquisition anymore.
Okay.
Right. So that's I'd like to talk about the heretic at heart business more.
Yeah.
But fear of the Inquisition, you're much more likely to suffer the Inquisition in some non-Catholic churches than you are the Catholic Church today.
Micah, tell your friend, be not afraid. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
Looking forward to our next visit. Hopefully that's tomorrow on the Friday edition of Call to Communion. On behalf of our great team, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. We will see you next time. Have a great one, and God bless.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is The Family Room. Mari, John, and Craig speak with authors, theologians, and priests